here is a 327 small block Chevy. These are pretty good engines. Pretty rare these days. Probably not gonna go to the local scrapyard and find too many of them. Seems people want a lot of money for these things. Crazy money, actually. I was looking at a few for sale online and shit. Don't even want to quote the numbers I seen, but yeah, times have changed. But say you run across one or come across a barn full of blocks some old guy left behind, you want to build you a real deal 327, but you don't know what the hell you're looking at. So yeah, these days you can pull out your phone and start googling numbers and shit. But what if you're somewhere where you don't have no, your phone ain't getting a signal, your shit ain't working, so you gotta wing it on your own. You gotta figure it out by sight. The thing about a 327 is there are several clues to tell you, shit to look for that other engines don't have. One thing, all your 327s are 2-bolt main. That's your typical 2-bolt main block. But they didn't. You don't need 4-bolt mains on one of these fucking things. You have to really be getting crazy with one. I've seen these things turn 8,500 RPM with stock caps, stock bolts. This one here probably did, actually. This used to belong to a friend of mine. He was a pretty good old boy. He was a gearhead. He died about 10 years ago. And his widow sold off. He had a building full of blocks and parts and shit. His widow sold off his shit. And his stepson that didn't have a clue to what he was even looking at. So I went over there and I got this fucking, it was the whole short block. I paid like $75 for it. But I knew the history of this fucking engine. I just kept a poker face. And I hadn't seen old boy in years. He got out there on the fucking drugs and shit pretty hard and partied himself to death. So, but I knew him back in the day. He was a fellow enthusiast. But he had an old 55 Chevy Gasser back in the 70s. He fucked around with. Drag car. Drove it on the street occasionally. But this is a 65 L79 327. It's a 350 horse 327. Small journal. But that old 55 Chevy, it was tunnelram, fender well headers, big fucking roller cam in it, 12.5-to-1 compression. It had some old 492 over-the-counter fuelie heads, angle plug. They were ported and shit and milled. And it was a strong running car. Had him a M22 Muncie rock crusher behind it. It was a badass ram clutch and shit. Had a, I think it was about a 57 or a 58 Oldsmobile 9.3 rear end. Big heavy duty bastard. Way stouter than what came in them 55 Chevys. But it was a badass car. I think it ran high tens in the quarter. And this is the block out of it. It's a real deal. No shit. Fucking L79. They put these in Corvettes and Super Sport Chevelles. I think they put them in the Chevy 2 Novas about 66. But 65 was the first year of the L79. And they went into Chevelles and Corvettes. Just looking at them, the 327s were made from 62 to, the good ones were 62 to 67. In 68, 69, they made a large journal 327 that was cast crank, more of a low power economy engine. It wasn't really, they were focusing on the 350 and the big blocks and shit by that time. The 327 just kind of went wayside. But prior to 67, they had some pretty strong offerings. You could get a 327 up to 375 horse advertised. And you had a 365, 360, 350, 340, 325, a 300, a 275. And they all pretty much used the same fucking block. And they all had a forged crank. There's the old crusty crankshaft out of it. But that's a fucking standard 1965 Ford steel 327 crank. Had a roller timing chain and shit in it. And the harmonic bouncer just pressed on these fuckers. So you had to tap it out and put a bolt in it yourself. But that crank there, it's got the fat parting line. That, turn that down 10-10. It'll be totally usable. But the small journal blocks, the mains on them, the fucking main journal diameter is 2.300, and the rods were 2-inch versus 210 and 245 for the large journal 350s and shit. And these small journal cranks have less friction. It's easy to make a high RPM little monster out of these things. 327s put ass whoopings on all kinds of shit back in the day. Fucking Hemis, big blocks, you know, all kinds of shit. Grumpy Jenkins fucking laid waste to all comers in pro stock 1972. And he had a 331 cubic inch small journal 327. That's what he used. And he was making around 680 horse with that fucking thing back in the early 70s. He had it in a Vega. Didn't weigh shit. And he cleaned house on everybody in the class. Grumpy Bill. Looking at these blocks. Got these big fucking plugs here. That's a distinguishing feature from the more modern shit. Look how thick the fucking meat is around the freeze plugs, core plugs, frost plugs, whatever you want to fucking call them. They're good thick blocks. Well, even the main cap bolts, typical 350s, have a 5/8 head, fucking a 7/16 bolt with a 5/8 head on it. These have a 11/16, so they spread the load out a little better. These fucking blocks are stout. Got strong fucking main webbing and shit. Good casting blocks. They had an old oil bath, oil filter, big canister fucker. You gotta get rid of them, get an adapter like that to run a regular oil filter. So you see that, you know it's a small journal block. The 283s and the 55, 56, 265s were also small journal blocks similar to this one, but they didn't have the 4-inch bore, unless you bored them out to that. But looking at the numbers and shit, you got your suffix code and numbers there. Look them up and tell the story what it come out of. You got all this fucking extra meat in here. Got your oil port there. Good robust son of a bitch. And you got your backside of that bastard. Here's numbers stamped in there. Good thick casting block. There's your block casting number, 870. That's what you want to see. The good 327s are 870 casting. I forgot what them later ones were, but they ain't worth even pursuing. And then you got your 327s. They didn't have a PCV valve and shit on the valve cover. They had this fucking road draft tube. And this is where your distributor go down in the block. And this big fucking hole here had like a big holes coming off of it, just running down to the road. It had like a 90 on it. And then you had your road draft tube shit bolted in right here. And it came in right here. But what you want to do is leave that shit out and get you a fucking freeze plug. pop in that hole there and forget about it. Best thing to do. And then your early blocks got this big fucking hole here where you had a oil fill tube on the front of your intake. So you see that, you know you got an early block. And you see that big fucking hole there, you know you got an early block. Here's your numbers you want to see. Of course you want to see a 4-inch bore. Here's your date code. It's going to be a November 23rd, 1964. So that's a 65. It came out in a 65 model vehicle. But that block was cast in November 64. This is a standard bore, low mile. I believe it come out of a totaled fucking, I think it might have been a Chevelle Super Sport that got wasted back in the 70s, late 60s. And this was the engine that got pulled out of it and stuck in a 55 Chevy. This old thing, it's a low mile unit. It was in a drag car most of its life. So it's standard bore, standard crank. That's the main thing, is 327 got the 4-inch bore. That fucking deck is dirty, but it's pretty good shape. But it needs, I'm gonna deck it probably to 9,800. I'm gonna build this fucker into a high RPM. I want 550 plus horsepower out of this thing and 8,000 plus RPM. And that's what I'm gonna do with it. Throw a 513 gear behind it, a fucking 5500 stall and shit. I might stick it in, I might stick it in my Blazer, I don't know. Or I might try to find me a Vega or something, a Monza maybe. But something suitable for a low torque, high RPM racing engine. So they ain't known for torque, but you can make up for torque with gear, and they will pull some high RPM horsepower. But you gotta build it accordingly. I'm probably gonna use these 215 dart heads got on this block. Use those heads. Probably this strip dominator. I got a 650 lift crane roller cam. Get it up around 12 and a half, 13 to 1 compression. Spin the fuck out of it. But throw some killer rods and shit in it. Probably use that stock steel crank. It'll hold up to more than people think it will. But probably knife edge it and shit, and get the rotating assembly gathered up and get it all balanced and shit together. want to turn it at least 8,000, 8,500. I ain't built one of them in a while. That was the shit back in the day. I wouldn't mind putting a tunnelram on it though. I am gonna keep my eyes out for a good tunnelram. Couple of 660 center squirt Holleys. Go old school with it. But this engine could make over 550 horse, no problem. I seen a super stock 327. This fucker, it wasn't even a, it was like a 300 horse 327. Had a Carter AFP carb on it and shit. It was right at 600 horsepower. Super stock 327. So it ain't very often people will let you see what they really make, but it's, you know, pretty highly competitive class of racing, so you don't want everybody knowing your shit. Gotta keep it on the down low. But that's about what a, you know, like I said, that was a 300 horse 327 super stock engine making 600 horse. You know, the ones that came with Holleys and shit, 350, 365 horse versions, super stock, would make a little more. And that was with some fucking old double hump heads that had a unbelievable amount of fucking work done to them. Probably $10,000 in them fucking double hump heads for a super stocker. So if they can do that with double humps and fucking a 500 CFM Carter, surely a motherfucker can do it with a pair of ported aftermarket fucking dart heads and a fucking 850 double pumper and more compression. I think that super stocker was running fucking flat top pistons. Some 300 horse 327s had flat tops. There's your 350 horse versions and up had domes in them. This engine here was factory 11-to-1 compression, so it had forged dome pistons in it from the factory. So they're pretty damn good engines. This is a project I'm slowly been gathering shit up for. I'm gonna get on it pretty soon. Go drop it off at the machine shop here in the near future. After I get my pistons for it. But it's just one project I've been fucking around with. Still got this nugget here to install. Got this fucking thing here to install. A couple of big blocks to put together there. Few more small blocks. Shit never ends. I started fucking with that big block, took the heads apart, or took one of the heads apart, found a boogered fucking guide, so I have to deal with that shit, so, but I pretty much got all the parts gathered up for it. Get that thing going pretty soon. But yeah, here's your 327. If you can find one, they're definitely worth building. Pretty damn good engine.